All right, we're going to get started. First of all, thank you everyone who traveled across the country to come and lobby in Washington, D.C. tomorrow. As a lobbyist, having citizens, activists come out and do the lobbying themselves is always, one of the best things that can help move an issue forward. It's helped tremendously with medical marijuana reform, and it's going to be great that we're going to be bringing that to some other components of drug policy reform. My name is Mike Lazewski. I'm an SSDP alum, and I used to be the Government Affairs Director at Americans for Safe Access. And I have started my own lobbying firm, the Enact Group, and we do lobbying for both DPA and SSDP on the Hill on a couple of different issues. So what we're going to do today in the training is we're going to review the Lobby Day training sheet. That is everything you're going to need to know about how to lobby. All the information is pretty much already in your head. This is just giving you a game plan of how you can assemble things you really already know and are experts on. Everything you learn this weekend is going to help you in these meetings. Then we're going to review the bills that we're going to be lobbying on. That's the federal policy agenda. If you haven't reviewed that, feel free to take a look. We're going to be referencing it throughout. And then we're going to do a little bit of role playing after that so you can practice what it's going to be like when you go to your meetings tomorrow and be prepared to deliver your talking points and your stories in an effective way. So, and then after that, Betty is going to give us a little bit of a logistics rundown of what to expect tomorrow morning, what time to get on the buses, all of that good stuff. So the great thing about lobbying is it's actually pretty easy. It's not that difficult a thing to do. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But wanted to talk at first some of the goals of what we want to accomplish by coming here to DC and doing lobbying. If you've never met with your electeds before, you want to establish a relationship. You want to show that their constituency cares about the issue that you care about, drug policy reform. If we're not going in there, who else is going to go in there? It's going to be opponents. It's going to be law enforcement. It's going to be everyone who wants to keep the status quo of the war on drugs. So showing up is the most important thing. If you've already had meetings before, sometimes it can feel like you're saying the same thing to the same office year after year, and that may seem mundane and tedious, but really it pays off in the long run. And we're starting to see that right now with marijuana reform on the Hill. Lots of people who we've had meetings with for years and years and years not really acting on it. Now that Jeff Sessions rescinded the Cole memo, all of a sudden they're starting to come out and be advocates for their states. So, it pays to keep doing the meetings over and over again. It may seem like it's not getting to them, but you have to tell them repeatedly. If you ask a politician once to do something, they're not going to do it. They're just not. It doesn't matter if it makes sense. It doesn't matter if it's the right thing to do. You got to keep doing these meetings periodically. The other thing that we're trying to hope to do with this is to get politicians and their staff excited about drug policy reform. We want them to know that their constituency really cares about this issue. If you want to get something passed, especially in Congress, you really need to get energetic staff to carry the water on that bill. The legislation will not move if the staff are apathetic about it. You need both the staff and the legislator, but really if you don't get those staffers first, it's very, very difficult to get the legislator to want to do anything further because they're the ones who are going to be briefing the legislator on the issue. They're the ones who are going to be delivering all the facts that they collect from both us and the opposition. So, getting meetings with staff, it may seem like it's not as good a thing as meeting with a member, but it's really, really crucial in building these relationships that will ultimately pass drug policy reform at the federal level. And while the goal is to make sure that we can get as many champions as possible, those offices that will form work groups and do sign-on letters and that sort of thing, what we really want to do is move people on that continuum from away from a hardcore opponent and towards being a champion. And if we can just get our hardcore opponents to just stop caring about being our opponents, they don't have to support us, they don't have to vote for us. All they have to do is let the bills go through their committees and just ease off the process. So, and getting people who are on the fence to be a little bit more supportive. Some people may, may not become actual full-on champions, but they'll start to vote for us. So really, it's all just about moving that needle a little bit forward and making incremental progress. So I came up with this lobbying formula. I don't think it's that original. It's probably out there elsewhere. But sort of a way that you can gather your information together and present it in a compelling way to legislative offices is by using a talking point, then following that up with a personal story that exemplifies that talking point, and then making your ask that's related to both the talking point and your personal story. On the cheat sheet here, we got a little bit of a rundown. You know, if you're not familiar what talking points are, if you're not familiar what storytelling is in a lobbying context, this is just some real basic information to get you going. The most commonly, talking points are statistics or poll data, but sometimes it can be facts that are juxtaposed together. For example, with the Higher Education Act, aid elimination penalty. That is a penalty that treats affluent students different than working class students and middle class students, because affluent students are not going to get penalized in the same way for the same conduct. And so, you know, that right there is just, you know, a real quick talking point that's not actually facts, or not statistics or poll data, but, you know, are just two facts that are juxtaposed. The policy agenda has all sorts of talking points in it that you can pull out. You can come up with your own, you know, short, just keep them short and keep them factual. One thing you always want to do in lobbying, no matter what, always be accurate, at least, you know, to the best of your knowledge. Don't fudge anything, don't make anything up if you don't know. In fact, if you don't know something, that's a great thing to let an office know. You can say, I don't know that. I can get back to you. And then you've created a great opportunity to have a follow-up conversation with that staffer. It also builds instant credibility, because if you say you don't know something, they know that you're not going to try to pull a fast one on you. And building that credibility when you're an issue that is controversial, like drug policy reform is really, really critical, because people are naturally going to be somewhat distrusting of us. It's just a reality. But by being accurate, by being a source of good information that, you know, can be reliable, it's going to help the movement in the long run. With storytelling, you know, we already went over being accurate. Being brief is good. You don't need to go on and on. A story should probably not last more than 5 minutes. If you can get your personal story in 60 seconds, that's sort of the gold standard. That way you can have, it's what's called an elevator speech. You may, when you're doing your meetings, you may run into your senator or your member of Congress in the hallways or in the elevator even, and you can speak to them. You can introduce yourself, say what you're here for, the SSDP Lobby Day, mention, you know, if you see them in the hall, you only have time probably to talk about one of the issues. Say that you're here to, you're on the lobby day, this is what's important to you, spit out one quick soundbite talking point, and, you know, if you can deliver a story at the back of that in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, it's probably going to resonate with that legislator, and it may not change their mind in that very instant, but it's going to be something that they may remember and that you can follow up with them at a later time. And every time one of us does that sort of thing, it all builds. It's all building on the last actions that other people are doing. You're going to be standing on the shoulders of people who have done lobby days before you, and everyone who does it in the future is going to be standing on your shoulders. So it all builds, and it's all worthwhile. The ask is probably next to accuracy, the most important thing you can do when you're in these meetings. You always want to end with an ask. You know, if you just go in there, you make your appeal that, you know, the politician should care about drug policy reform. You know, you make an impassioned plea. You have a great story, but then you don't make an ask. It's all for nothing. So you want to make sure at the end of all your meetings you're asking for something that's actionable for the politician to do. I want you to sign on to the Marijuana Justice Act. I want you to introduce legislation to end the aid elimination penalty, to the Higher Education Act. Whatever it is from the policy agenda, that's what you want to follow through with and ask. And all these skills that you're going to be using tomorrow, you can take this back to your campus. You can take this back to your state. Lobbying, it's pretty much the same thing at every level when you're dealing with a bureaucracy. The names change, some of the rules change in terms of how things interact and the logistics, but for the most part, it's the same thing, whether it's at the campus level, county, federal, state. So you can use these skills in any number of, well, maybe about 5 different places. But so one of the things to keep in mind when you're building your stories is to know who your audience is. If you're speaking to a Democrat, if you're speaking to a Republican, they're going to respond differently to the same story. Democrats, social justice pleas are going to resonate more with Democrats than they are with Republicans. Republicans, when it comes to drug policy, states' rights, letting states set their own rules, economic data, things like that are going to be what sticks with Republicans. So you want to sort of know who you're talking to and frame your message in the best way that you can, while being honest and sincere about the issue and not selling it short. On the right-hand column here of the cheat sheet, pulled some keywords that appeal to liberals and conservatives and to both members. These are courtesy of our friends at LEAP. They have a more extensive document about this, but this is just some of the highlights. And if you noticed at the end of the keywords that speak to everyone, what one's in there? Sensible. That's right. Who are we? Sensible. Right on. So after you make your ask and you leave the office, you got to do some follow-up. That's the next step. You want to make sure you get your business card from the staffer after the meeting, and then within 48 hours, send them an email, thank them for the meeting, let them know that you'd like to continue the conversation at another time. Maybe ask if there's a way that you can meet the member in your home district. But you want to keep building that relationship and sending a thank you notes the way that you can start that. And then give them updates from your state. When you've passed a new law, if your state has reformed its marijuana laws or has done anything on harm reduction, you can send that staffer an email and give them an update, because that's how they're going to find out. The staffers on the Hill are very, very busy. They're often working on a number of different issues, and they need to rely on other people to deliver them that information. In fact, that's really what lobbyists do. And so, if you can help be a conduit of that good information, again, being accurate, it's going to really go a long way in the end. So before your meetings, there's sort of a checklist of things that you can go over to make sure you're prepared. If you have the bills available, you want to make sure you read over the bills. You don't have to study each and every line of the bill. If you feel like it, that's great. But know what the legislation is going to do, not just generally, but try to get a good sense as you can as to what the different provisions do. If you don't know them, though, it doesn't matter. You can still go into the meeting and advocate for it. Sometimes you're going to be advocating for new legislation that you want to see them introduce. In fact, that's what we're doing with the legislation to amend the RAVE Act. In those instances, you just have to be familiar with whatever that draft bill is, or the model language or suggested language that you're going to be putting in there. And if it's amending a law, it may be a good idea to look up that legal provision. So before you get into your meetings, and when you're going to be going in groups, we're going to have the teams. I think we're going to have the printouts in the back. We're definitely going to have the printouts of all your teams and schedules by the time you get on the bus tomorrow. But you want to decide before each meeting who's going to play each role. And people can play more than, one person can play more than one of these roles. In fact, one person can do all of the following. But if you want to get a flavor of lobbying and you want to split things up, you can divide these roles up. One person could be the facilitator. This is the person who checks in with the office, lets them know that we're with the SSDP lobby day, how many people are there, that everyone's in, and does the introductions in the meeting, maybe says a few words about what Students for Sensible Drug Policy does, what you do with Students for Sensible Drug Policy in your state, and that can get the meeting going. You have another person be the fact person. That would be the person who would deliver the talking points, the statistical data, the polling data. If you want to have one person do that, you can split it up that way. You can have one person or maybe two people deliver stories and focus on that. Really important that someone takes notes. And you don't have to take notes on everything that is being said by your team members, because you already know that already. But one thing you want to be paying attention to is if the staffer is taking notes, because when the staffer's ear perks up and they decide they're going to be writing something down, that's going to be important. That's something that they're probably reporting to their boss. It's something that's of interest to them. So make a note if you notice the staffer making a note themselves. Then, at the end of your meeting, you can ask them if you can take a picture. That's great for social media, but definitely make an ask. Don't just spring a camera out and surprise them. The offices are very, very particular about that. If you're in the halls or if you're outside, the rules are a little bit looser about that. If you want to, if you see your member and you want to, Facebook Live real quick or something. But generally, you want to make that ask, especially if you're in the office, and throw it up on social media. One thing to do before your meetings is review who the key players are. In Congress, the biggest players are House and Senate leadership. They're the ones that control whether bills move to the floor or not. If one of your members is in one of these influential roles, it's great for a drug policy reformer to be meeting with them as a constituent. Other really influential members are the committee chairs. In fact, this is the main reason why drug policy reform is essentially, at least for marijuana reform, is stalled in this Congress, is the judiciary chairs, Chuck Grassley in the Senate and Bob Goodlatte in the House, won't let any reform bills come up. So the good thing is Bob Goodlatte will be out after this term, and we'll get a reshuffling of the deck, and we may get a different we definitely will be getting a different House Judiciary Chair. The only way we're going to get a different Judiciary Chair in the Senate, however, is if in the 2018 elections the Democrats end up taking the Senate. Of course, that could just end up with Dianne Feinstein ending up as the Judiciary Chair, because she is the ranking member currently on the Democrat side, and that wouldn't change things too much. So what I'm really driving at is get involved in the 2018 elections. If you want to be able to influence what Congress is going to be doing in 2019 and beyond, we need to do a lot. We either need to flip the chamber so that the Dems are in control and so that we have a different situation with the committee chairs, or vote out the committee chairs so that different Republicans come in who are going to be more respectful of states setting their own drug policies. All right, so when you're going to your meetings, definitely show up on time. Try to get there 10 minutes ahead of time. Everything on the Hill takes a little bit longer than it should. There's security. If you go out of a building, you'll have to walk back in through security. And sometimes the security is a breeze and you can get right through. Other times, there's a huge group in front of you and you might be waiting 15 minutes to get through. Other logistical things with that, If your meetings are really close together time-wise, one on the House side, one on the Senate side, be aware it takes about 10 or 15 minutes to walk from the Senate office buildings to the House office buildings. So you want to make sure you build in enough time and keep track in whatever your first meeting is, that you have enough time to make your second meeting, if that's the case. All right. So now we're going to talk about some of the legislation that we are going to be advocating for. If you have the federal policy agenda in front of you, our 3-point federal policy agenda is for 2018 is to end federal marijuana prohibition, 2, fully repeal the aid elimination penalty from the Higher Education Act, and 3, amend the RAVE Act to allow venues to provide harm reduction services at events. So there's a lot of legislation out there in Congress right now to end federal marijuana prohibition. The preferred bill of SSDP is the Marijuana Justice Act. That is H.R. 4815, and it's also introduced in the Senate. I don't have the Senate bill number handy. 1689. Oh, yeah, there it is at the bottom. This is really, really what I think SSDP's model federal marijuana legislation would look like. In addition to ending federal marijuana prohibition, it also creates a path for expungement and resentencing of people who have been convicted of federal marijuana crimes. It creates a community reinvestment fund for communities that have been most adversely affected by the war on drugs. And it puts guardrails on states that they will lose some of their federal funding if their if their state marijuana enforcement has disproportionately impacted people of color or low-income people. So it really, really sets the gold standard of what marijuana reform could look like. It's the preferred bill of the organization. That said, this bill is more of a messaging piece, and only Democrats are likely to sign on to it. So we're going to try to get every Democrat that we can to get onto this bill, because they really should be on it. Now, that said, we got some other really good marijuana reform bills that have been introduced by Republicans, and they're also worth our time in supporting. The Ending Federal Marijuana Prohibition Act, H.R. 1227, would completely end federal marijuana prohibition, and it would also allow for interstate transport of marijuana from states that have legalized into other states that have legalized. There's a similar bill from Dana Rohrabacher, H.R. 975, or States Marijuana Laws Act. That one's also worth supporting, because that's the one that has the most co-sponsors right now, and probably if there was a bill that had the best chance to make its way through in the next Congress, that's probably it. So all 3 of these are worth supporting. However, like I said before, with the current Congress and the Judiciary committees really blocking all of our paths for these bills to make it through in this Congress, we have a second path that we can get reform accomplished, and that's through appropriations amendments. Now, this is going to get a little technical, but the appropriations process is when Congress sets its spending for the year, and what Congress can do is pass amendments on how that spending can be used. And we've done this successfully with preventing the federal government from using any money to enforce against state medical marijuana laws and the people acting in compliance with them. That's the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer Amendment. It's been in since 2014, and it's been successfully used in federal court to keep people out of jail for complying with their state medical marijuana laws. We're trying to expand that to adult use marijuana in this Congress. Unlike these other marijuana bills that we still want people to co-sponsor because that's going to build support for this issue. But we have a real chance of passing an expansion of the Rohrabacher Amendment to cover recreational marijuana state laws. And so that's something that you should also be asking in your meetings. All right, the next bill is the Success Act. The Success Act would fully repeal the Higher Education Act's aid elimination penalty. The aid elimination penalty is one of the reasons SSDP formed in the first place 20 years ago. And back in 2006, SSDP was successful in leading the lobbying effort that repealed most of the aid elimination penalty's reach. Originally, anyone with a drug conviction would be denied the opportunity to have federal student loan money. In 2006, that was restricted to just convictions that take place while a student is enrolled. So a lot of the damage was undone at that point, but there's still people who are losing their federal student loan money for a drug conviction. And like I said earlier, this is only going to impact working class families, middle class students, because affluent students, A, they don't need student loan money to go to school in the first place. B, they can hire lawyers. So it's really, really set up to only penalize working class, lower class, or middle class rather, students for the same conduct that affluent students can get away with. The bill, the Success Act, it would repeal the aid elimination penalty, and it would also repeal the question on the FAFSA form, so that would no longer be on the student loan application. The next piece of legislation, and this is something that we worked with D.D. Goldsmith from Amend the Rave Act on, and this would be to amend the Rave Act component, USC 21856. Yeah, that's the one. That's the part of the Rave Act that club owners who say they can't put out free water because that indicates that there's drug behavior going on at a venue. That's the law that they're referencing. What we are asking legislators to do is to include in that law an exemption that the following list of items are things that do not count towards knowingly harboring drug activity at a venue. And so, providing access to free water, allowing on-site medical services that specialize in drug overdose response, all these things that can help save lives, but aren't being done simply because club owners and venue promoters simply are misapplying what this law actually says. So what we would like for you all to start doing right now is to do some role playing, getting to familiarize yourself with these bills and start thinking about personal stories that you have that relate to this legislation. When you go to your meetings, you're probably only going to be able to talk about one or maybe two of these issues in the amount of time you have. So you don't have to come up with something for each one of these three. If you can, great. But really, as long as you come up with one for for just one of the bills, you'll be in good shape for tomorrow. Before we get started with that, does anyone have any questions about the legislation or anything else we've gone over? Yes. So the Marijuana Justice Act is a lot more comprehensive. It creates a community reinvestment fund so that money is put back into communities that have been devastated by federal marijuana prohibition, low-income communities, communities of color, where the arrest rates have been disproportionate. It also, unlike any of the other marijuana bills, it creates a path for expungement and resentencing of federal marijuana convictions. And it also requires that states be not have disproportionate enforcement of state marijuana crimes. Otherwise, the state will lose certain components of federal funding. So it goes much further. The issue with that is only Democrats are going to get on board with this idea, and we need support on both sides of the aisle. And the two other marijuana bills that are on the agenda, those do have support from Republicans, and we can build that support even further on Monday. So I would encourage them to get on both of them. Yeah. Great. Anyone else? Yes, yeah. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, the federal policy agenda, that's the leave behind item that you're going to be handing staffers when you get to your meetings. So make sure you have enough copies for all your meetings. We just had the team sheets printed out, so we can distribute these at the end. Each team had at least one meeting scheduled. Some have more. If you weren't able to get your meeting scheduled, I know a lot of you put some effort into that and just, you tried every day and you still weren't able to do it. You can still get an opportunity at getting meetings for those unscheduled offices. And what you want to do tomorrow when you're on the bus, call the office, let them know you're coming, ask if you can get a time to meet. If you can't get it then, walk to that office first thing after we take the pictures. We're going to be taking a picture when we get off the bus tomorrow. After that, if you don't have a meeting immediately scheduled after the picture, go to one of these unscheduled offices. Let them know that you're here from the SSDP lobby day. Ask to meet with the drug policy staffer. And if they're not available to meet at that time, leave the federal policy agenda and let them know that you're going to be there till 2, 3, 4, however late you're going to be in the afternoon. And if that they can make some time, you'd be happy to meet with them. Yeah, it's bending over backwards to meet their schedules, but by doing that, you're going to, you always have to be courteous with the Hill staff. If we act exasperated, it's not going to help us out in the long run, and it's really, really better for us to just sort of take that on the chin and to take the high road on that. But if you don't end up with any sort of contact with these offices, then you take that back to your state district office and let them know that you came all the way to Washington, D.C. to meet with the office, and that you were unable to get a meeting, and that you would like to meet with the member next time that they're in the district, and try to arrange it that way. Yeah, so that's a great question. To doing some background intelligence on electeds, reading their official bios is a great place to look, because that has the things that they are most proud of in there. And you may see some things in there that you were surprised that, oh wow, this person's seems to be opposed to everything I like, but they've supported some good environmental legislation. So you might be able to, yes, yeah. And GovTrack and Congress.gov are great resources to find out, who is on a committee, who's sponsored legislation. That's one thing you definitely want to do. Check to make sure who you're going to meet with. Make sure that to see if they've already co-sponsored the bill. If you're asking them to co-sponsor something they're already on, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it does make us look a little unprofessional. Okay. If they've made that request, just let the team know that it's a solo meeting, that they only wanted to meet with constituents. But usually they'll be willing to accommodate a group, especially if it's from the same state. So yeah, if an office specified we can only take one person, or we can only take constituents, respect the office's wishes. So the second part, no, we don't have that, but we are going to be collecting feedback from all the meetings. There's going to be a hard copy feedback form that you all can write down your quick thoughts, and when you're picking up your luggage, tomorrow. You can report back that way. We'll also have an online feedback form. As far as recording meetings, yeah, you absolutely have to get consent. It's pretty unlikely that someone will let you record a meeting, but if you're meeting with one of our champions, say it's like someone like Cory Booker or Jared Polis, who knows? They might want to have that on Facebook Live or something like that. Well, for me, it's not an either or. They should be doing all four of those things. Every one. No, it's only that Democrats are likely to get on to Marijuana Justice Act, and it's also you're not gonna get a hard answer to your ask in that moment. That's something else to keep in mind. Is they're gonna, especially if you're meeting with a staffer, they can't tell you, like what their boss is going to ultimately say. But if you don't make that ask, they're not going to have an ask to go back to report to their boss, like to say. And constituent meetings, pretty much every ask that's ever recorded in a constituent meeting gets reported to the boss, because the boss is going to want to know about that in case there's an angry constituent that's met with them, asked for this, and hasn't heard anything. So yeah, you absolutely want to make those asks and do it for each one, but with the understanding that you're really unlikely to get an answer in that moment. I think that's a bit of a judgment call. While it's unlikely to be persuasive on them, I'm of the mindset, and this may not be the most effective lobbying tactic, but I think these offices need to hear it. I think they need to hear when Republicans need to hear that the war on drugs is racist. I mean, like they need to hear it.